So the show's all yours, my friend. Well, let's have a discussion.
Yes, glad to. So about anything you want. I love these things because they go in a direction we never have any knowledge of. So
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about wizardry, because that's something that someone actually in your PR team shared with us. And I was like, okay, so I'm a big proponent to alchemy. So I'm a big believer in alchemy, philosophical alchemy, or even physical alchemy. But would love to hear your thought on what they meant by wizardry or how they described you.
so I think people get a little bit of fantasy in their heads when they start talking about magic and wizardry. I'm a physicist, okay, so I'm a scientist. I've spent my life trying to figure out how and why things work. So if I find a mystery, I like to try and understand the mystery. And then once you understand it, it's no longer a mystery. It's just a mystery because we're slightly ignorant of what it is. So I haven't figured it out yet. So my favorite definition for wizardry and magic goes all the way back to Aleister Crowley, who was loved or hated depending on which version of history people read. And that is that magic is the conversion of one form of energy into another form of energy under the power of will within the law of nature. And when I read that, I was only about 14, 15 when I read that. It suddenly unraveled all the mystery. Like, oh, that's so what he's saying the same thing as Einstein. The energy and matter are just different proponents, or just different components of the same thing. So, and the third law of thermodynamics in physics is that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only converted from one form to another. So, from energy into material, from material like ice to vapor, vapor to rain, rain back to ice, that type of thing. And so, I found that fascinating, and it took away all the mystery. So, for me, I've been talking about magic all my life, not to confuse people, but to demystify it, basically. I mean, it's what I do with my companies, right? I come up with a winning idea. I convert it into a physical entity that has an impact in the world. And then when I exit, I convert that into money energy, and then I go spend it and convert the money energy into another form of energy, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, the world is just flowing energy, and magic is an unfortunate word that's probably slipped into our vocabulary over the years to make it seem unreachable to most people. But what I'm trying to teach people is it's right here. It's right inside you. And
So when you say inside, I like that, because that's where there's so many boundaries for humans that they get stuck in this mindset, right? That's just based on what they understand or see or comprehend in their current state. They never actually look at their future state, what they could basically uncover by just staying open-minded to a new thought process. Right. In my view, value systems play a significant role in that, in how humans basically comprehend like their own evolution. What do you think contributes to a human's evolution?
Well, experience, but being able to stand back and not judge it as good or bad, just as experience. Being able to say, okay, I did this. It's like cooking for me. Okay, so I get different results every time I put the same ingredients together. So if I'm careful and I'm focused and I'm happy, and I put the ingredients in the right order, the right amount, and then the oven's the right temperature, and I put it in, I get a really tasty cake coming out. But if I'm stressed or flustered, I'm not paying attention, I put a little bit too much of this, a little bit too little of that sort of thing, what comes out is something completely different. But I don't mind the fact that one worked and one didn't work, because I'll look at it and try and learn from it. And I can figure out why that one was delicious, because I took my time. And then on this one, I'm thinking, yeah, I was in a rush. I shouldn't have done it when I did it. So for me, it's always learning from the experience itself and not judging it as a good thing or a bad thing. I think when I was younger, I grew up in a world where everyone seemed to be judging. I grew up in England first, and then we got evicted and moved to a farmhouse in North Wales. And it seemed a fairly negative environment. Everybody's being judged and everybody's judging everything else. And it seemed to me that the human mentality was to aim for something, an illusion of perfection. Mm-hmm. And for me, that would be so interminably boring if the world was perfect and everybody was perfect and everybody was good and everybody did everything right. It would be so boring. I'd want to get off the world, I think. My wife, I was married for 40 years before my wife died a couple of years ago. And one of the things she and I always used to say is, the thing I love about you most is what other people think are your flaws. And she used to say the same for me. I love your flaws, Trevor. I love the way you trip up all the time. I love the way you're clumsy. I love the way you can't do any DIY around the house. These are the things that made me me. And for my wife, it was those things that made her special for her, including her illnesses. She had a lot of illnesses through her whole life, and they made her special. And other people looked at it and judged it as flaws and would try to get away from that type of thing. And I think all of life is to be celebrated without judgment.
So is life to be celebrated or experienced? Because that's I think celebrated is a very joyful word, right? But not every lifetime and every life cycle is pleasurable in essence, even if it is educational.
But it still should be, I believe, greeted with gratitude. And so perhaps celebration is the wrong word, more gratitude. So I'm as grateful for the bad experiences in my life as I am the good ones. But I did not have a good father, so that people would judge him. They would say he checked out of life, and he did. He was a lazy man. He gave up on life. He sat we lived on welfare. He sat at home reading books all day. He made no effort to try and find employment, and didn't try to help my mother, who walked 5 miles to the delicatessen to work a half day behind the counter. I observed both of those. I learned a huge amount from my mother and her sort of you can do anything, Trevor type of wisdom. But probably now today, when I look back, I learned more from my father. Because of his laziness, I became a better husband. Because of his inability to start a company and get it moving forward, he started about 15 different companies and then just gave up on life. I learned how to do that, how to start a company and keep going, because I watched and observed his inability to do that. And so I have gratitude for both those experiences, gratitude for my mom, who's the reason I'm probably alive today, and gratitude to my father, who's probably the reason I'm a successful entrepreneur. So maybe gratitude is a better word than celebration. Although, as I look back, revisionist history, I can feel like I'm celebrating both.
When you think of death, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
That it doesn't exist.
Okay, talk to me about that. I'd love to see your viewpoint on that.
Okay, well, I view it as a scientist primarily, but I've also had many experiences that show me there's other dimensions to experience rather than just these 3-dimensional 5-sensory experiences we have right now. Everything in the universe is made of energy. When we go down microscopically, we can show that the energy itself is made up of pretty much the same stuff. Fermions and bosons, basically the 2 building blocks of life and death, are fermions and bosons. So as I'm talking to you now, there's a palm tree out there that, when I was growing up, I would have been able to say, oh, that palm tree is alive because it's upright and it's enjoying the sunshine and the water and the ground. And I would have said that the desk I'm talking from here is dead because it's a piece of wood. Mm-hmm. But that's made of exactly the same stuff as this is made of. So this is also made of fermions and bosons. The difference between the two is that those fermions and bosons are vibrating at a certain frequency, and these fermion bosons are vibrating at a slightly different frequency. But if you want to go down that rabbit hole, what it also says is that nothing is dead. There is no death. Everything just changes form. And so for me, the 3 dimensions that we claim as our human body are an illusion, because they're just basically fermions and bosons configured and jiggling strings. In string theory, in physics, it's shown mathematically that it's impossible for anything to exist at all unless it exists in at least 28 dimensions of space, so shape. They're very small, folding on each other. And so I'm only aware of 3. Right? So I live in a cube world because I'm a human. I only have 5 senses as a human. But that means there's 25 other dimensions that I exist in right now that I'm not aware of. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm able to stretch my senses or do certain activities that can help me understand life beyond just a cubic 3 dimensions, then I'm able to get a little taste, a little sound, a little notion of some of those other dimensions. And in those other dimensions are the spirits of people who I knew previously in a 3 dimension. Mm-hmm. And I'm able to connect through the Higgs field, which is this cosmic glue that connects everything together. I'm able to kind of stretch and connect. And so in my course Transformation, which is at trevorgblake.com, we've got practical tools and techniques to teach people how to take the illusion of just 3 dimensions and stretch a little bit, experience a little bit of another dimension, and have the fun of doing that. And the minute you do that and do it successfully, you come to the realization that there's no such thing as death. There's just changing form.
Do you believe you're having a simultaneous experience in 25 different dimensions, or are you having it separately from the experience you're having here?
That's a brilliant question. You see, there's no science that says whether they're simultaneous to what we're having now, or whether they're parallel universes or different experiences or 25 different experiences of the same event.
But I'd like to know your thoughts on that rather than the scientific explanation from your own perspective, because we all have a belief up to a certain point, and then that shifts as we get more information. And obviously, as we evolve individually, become more conscious, we're more aware of what these dimensions are and how they impact us. But I'm just curious from your perspective to date, do you feel that these are simultaneously experiencing like ultimately the same experience time frame in a different manner, or is it a completely different dynamic of experience that is taking place completely unrelated to your physical relationship with Earth today?
Well, it's a belief not based on science, but I believe
Sure.
it's 28 different experiences, because even in our three dimensions, those three dimensions experience life differently.
Mm-hmm.
Up and down, left and right is, so a caterpillar only knows two dimensions. That's the left and right, because it's standing on a leaf. It has no idea there's such a thing as a butterfly that understands what flight is like and what height is like. So, and the butterfly might want to talk to the caterpillar and say, hey, one day you'll fly. And there's no way the caterpillar would believe that, right? I'm a caterpillar, I'm going to die. And then the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. So I think the same thing happens to us. So it's, as a three-dimensional human, it's really hard for me to grasp the fact that when I die, I might experience a much more fulfilling life like a caterpillar. So I believe the other dimensions offer other experiences that the three dimension is held in this sort of dense box. So they're different. My personal evidence of that is that I believe, because I've scientifically proven it and teach the tools and techniques that help people get the experience of it, your life in the three dimensions is not predetermined. So you can change at any point. Or one can change at any point simply by changing the way we think, the way we behave, maybe the way we write, the way we talk. We change the path that we're taking all the time, constantly readjusting, because energy is just a label for what we describe as constant change. Everything's constant change. We can control that change to a degree. So I'm pretty sure that in the other 25 dimensions, the other Trevor Blakes will be able to control it themselves as well with their consciousness.
When you're talking about it's not predestined, basically, you can change things all the time. Tell me a little bit about free will versus destiny and your view on it, because my view is that basically it is predestined, but it isn't pre-walked, if that makes sense. So it has still been like, even though it's in a way, perhaps you've designed for yourself kind of a path for giving yourself a map to what you'd like to experience on Earth during this lifetime. You still have to walk that, in my opinion. So you can still change the outcome of it. Doesn't mean that just because you pre-wrote it, you might make a map to go to California, via car, but doesn't mean you're gonna take every turn exactly as you included in the map and get there, right? There's 100 chances where you could get in a car accident and die halfway, or something could occur that could completely change the trajectory of what your intent was during this lifetime. But I'm just curious on your view on this similar topic.
So in the last part of what you said there, I would say that for me is evidence that it's not predetermined, because I always imagine I'm up, there's such a place as heaven, and I'm up and I'm about to reincarnate on earth. And as I'm leaving the pearly gates, whoever it is at the pearly gates, he says, Trevor, how'd you like to die? I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you're going to have a life here. How'd you like to die? So I said, well, I'd like to die in my sleep next to a beautiful woman half my age. Okay, that would be my choice. So he said, I'm sorry, someone else has already got that. Hugh Hefner has got that. You can't have that one. So you can have something else. And I said, and he'll go down the list, right? And then in the end, I'll say, well, what's left? And he says, oh, you'll just be walking with your family on a nice sunny day past a warehouse in Beirut that happens to be storing fireworks, and it's going to blow up and you'll be smashed into a million pieces. I don't want that. So I would say, no, I'm not going back for that. I want to die peacefully in my sleep. So the fact that people die in a million different ways, and often horribly, makes me think that it can't be predetermined, because who with a sane mind would choose that? And who with a sane mind would make that happen or allow that to happen? So I think we control it.
Well, you said something really interesting here. So predetermined does not mean that the end is predetermined. I meant that the trajectory is predetermined. So what I meant by that is, if you wanted to end up in California, as an example, and you lived in Florida, right, and you did that road, the argument is not that something could occur halfway that would blow you into pieces or end you. That is the random segment of free will, and the fact that there is an actual moving force that occurs with or without our existence. Like the world doesn't revolve around us individually, specifically as one individual. So the dynamics of this work takes place. Like a plane crashes with an intent that something much larger was to occur. You're the byproduct of being on that plane at that moment, even though that was not meant to be your destiny at that very moment. My argument is, do you believe that because you brought up something during this conversation, which I want to get back to in a second, which is the whole idea that you said, I'm in heaven. So does religion play a belief into your thought process, like any religion, not necessarily, so because the word heaven in itself is religious in nature, or unless you're talking about something else. So that's why I'm curious as to, like, how does that, because a predetermined death is something different from what I'm talking about, which is a predetermined destination. Now that death occurs, or randomness, acts of randomness or free will or whatever occurs in between based on choices you've made that take you certain paths or places that perhaps you weren't meant to go. The argument is not that can you die a gruesome death or not, but my argument would be that no one would plan their death, but rather how they live. And if death is the equation, is the equalizer, the excitement of the equation in a way, because by knowing death exists, right, you have to play the game till the end. You can't just be like, well, I know I'm not going to die. That random equation is the best part.
I think all that is something that a lot of people would love to believe, primarily because people are generally scared of death. Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. I agree with that.
Yeah, and I'm not right. So I've had the experiences. I've talked to my mother after her death. I talked to my wife after her death. I spent a year building a psychic bridge back to Lynn. In her life, she was she makes TV mediums look like amateurs. She was clairvoyant and clairaudient naturally, like that. And so I lived along that for quite some time. So there's really three questions. Your first question, well, you mentioned heaven, so I'll go back to the religion in a bit. I'm what I would call a-religious, in that I don't subscribe to any religion, but I like to study them all.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which is important, right?
Yeah, and then I find a pattern. Like I read a lot of biographies, and I find in biographies patterns of behavior, and those patterns of behavior became the 3 simple steps, the book that I wrote. So I find the same things about religions. There's patterns that run through it, and I find almost like a common story. It's like the same story told in 250 different ways.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Yeah,
I believe there's something like 250 religions around. So that's why I throw out the word heaven. It can mean different things to different people in different religions. Back to the predestiny type of thing. If I am in control of when I was about 15 or 16, I was at high school, and it was the time to decide, okay, what you're going to be when you grow up. And you had to have a one-on-one appointment with a school counselor. And when I was in that room, very tiny little closet-like room, the counselor said, I've got an application for you. So I said, what's that for? And she said, for apprentice manager at a chicken packing factory in the next town. The next town was Denby. That's the determination that the world had for somebody like me, or not particularly brilliant student, he's not going to amount to anything, and there aren't any jobs in this area unless you're a farmer, and he's not a farmer. I responded that I intend to join the Royal Navy and be an officer, because that was my passion. So did I determine my outcome? Yes, I absolutely did. If I'd let life determine it, I'd have been working in a chicken packing factory. But I determined what happens next. 18 months later, I was on the parade square starting my naval career, and I've done that all my life. So fast forward to 2001, where I was actually living in Florida and did drive across country, which is it's such a boring thing to do. I always thought it'd be so nostalgic to drive across country, but
no, I've done it too. It's terrible. Yeah.
It's awful. It's like I'll never get that week back again.
Yeah, it's terrible.
So I was at middle management in a biotech company, and I decided to start my own company. I was not qualified. I did not have a brilliant idea. I had a bit of an idea. I had no support. I had no money. I had no way of going from, middle management career to building that company, making a huge difference in the lives of babies with a rare disease, and then exiting and selling that a few years later for over 100 million. And yet I determined that. Mm-hmm. Because right at the beginning, I wanted to prove my doubters wrong. And the way to prove them wrong was I kept saying to myself, I have sold Qual Medical. It still exists. It's QOLmedical.com. I have sold Qual Medical for at least $100 million. And then I sold it for $100 million, 105.5 actually. Was that predetermined? The company didn't exist until I built it. The idea wasn't there till I saw something and thought, that's not right, I'm going to fix that. I always think entrepreneurs are fixers. You're not born an entrepreneur. You see something that he's fixing, you go fix it. And so for me, that I think that we determine our outcome every step of the way. And for me, I try to one of the things I teach in transformation is there's tools and techniques that you can use that can give you a real advantage in doing that. And one is to imagine your future currently experienced. So you imagine what that feels like today. And there's nuances around that, obviously, but that's it in a nutshell. If you imagine, if you go for something, say, I want that. Now I'm going to imagine what it feels like to have that experience. Mm-hmm. And that experience shows up.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, in a way, that's the real way of the power of manifestation, right? Like manifesting your future by being part of it and experiencing that ahead of its time. So you can basically become it. I want to go back for a second to this idea of studying religions. And I thought this was a very good conversational piece. So, you said you study all religions and you see a common theme. I've seen a very similar theme too. I'd like to ask just a two-parted question. The first one is, which religion do you feel was most aligned to your belief today? And secondly, I know it's not direct, like saying this is a religion I practice, but rather which religion's theme was most aligned to your belief today? And then specifically also, which philosopher has had the greatest impact or thought process on your belief today as well?
Okay, two brilliant questions, which I'm loving, by the way. This is a great conversation. So there's no one religion I can say that I've studied. When I say I've studied lots of religions, it's probably only three. But there's no religion.
What are those three, if you mind just sharing those?
Yeah, so obviously Christianity, because that's the way I was brought up, and we can talk a little bit about that. Islam and what used to be called a Baizoza, which is basically a offshoot, a Sanskrit offshoot from the original text from which Christianity and Islam were all taken. I've also studied the original Vulgate version of the Bible with what's her name? Kendra Stevenson. So Dr. Kendra Stevenson. This is a couple of decades ago, and she was a female Catholic priest who also spoke fluent Hebrew and Aramaic. And she kind of she realized that the Bible she's supposed to be using to give advice to people is badly translated, badly mistranslated 1,000 times, like the King James I Bible, 24,000 translation errors in that Bible alone. And so she unraveled things back to their original meaning. So she went back to the original language, not just the language, but the tone that was used in those languages, because it was, as she explains, it's so important to get the tone right, because the vocabularies were really small. They didn't have, cars and chimneys and stuff like that. They had a very, very simple life. And so the languages were very simple too. And the tone, the way the language was used, determined the meaning. And without knowing that, if you're just translating the word itself, you get a different meaning. So she took it back to the origin of that. And in that origin is the same story. And then back behind that are the scrolls from Babylon. Same story, exactly the same story. The nativity and the resurrection are all in those stories from 5,000 years ago. And so my study's gone that way. So then when I pull myself forward a little bit and I get hold of something like the King James Bible, and I see something that says something like, it's harder for a rich man to go through the eye of the camel, all that kind of nonsense. Okay. I realize that it's taken completely out of context and it means something different. So where I'm getting to in this is that in all of the things I've studied, the same message has been taken and then distributed in incorrect ways. And the same message is that the kingdom of God is within, the meaning of which is that inside of each of us is the power to create. We are our own creator. And so that was the original message. That then, through time and through different societies and through different authorities, that was a threat to the authority. And so it got changed dramatically. Philosopher. So there's no one philosopher that I would say I follow. I try to read as many as I possibly can. And I love people like Alan Watts, but mainly because of their beautiful gravelly voice and the way he was able to take Eastern philosophy and Western religion and put them together in a non-threatening way. Basically say, okay, this is the same thing. And he used beautiful phraseology like, it's all one suchness. You know, as a scientist, I'll say we're all made of the same stuff. As a philosopher, he would say we're all one suchness, a playing of energy. So people like that who are able to bring together disparate positions or disparate messages and show that it's all the same stuff, I'm a big fan of. So people like Alan Watts primarily, and people who challenge my belief system, like the Edgar Cayce's and people like that. They've been a big influence on my life, not necessarily because I like them or follow them, but because they challenge my belief system sufficiently that I want to look elsewhere and figure out, well, how and why does that work?
What do you think the most powerful experience has been that has transformed you in the last 20 years?
The last 20 years would be obviously the being a caregiver to my wife. For such a long time, it's a commitment, and it was one of the most beautiful and biggest privileges I've ever had in my life. So, from a personality standpoint, that's been the biggest influence for me. When I was much younger, the biggest influence in my life was watching my mother's ability to handle a death notice. Basically, she was given 6 months to live. When I was 7, and she fought it. I remember looking up into the sky. She was a Christian woman. She did believe in God, and she looked up through the back window and she said, "I'll come when I'm ready, not when you tell me." And by that, she meant she's going to make sure her 3 children grow up and are safe. And so that was just to see what indefatigable looks like in a woman's eye is a very powerful thing. And I never forget it. So today, when I hit it, what I think is a challenge in business or in writing or something like that, all I have to do is remember that. I remember that the vision of seeing my mother's determination in her eyes, her indefatigable nature. And I think that this is nothing, right? So that's been a huge experience for me in my life, to see the same thing played out as a dutiful, loving husband with a wife who had so many difficult health issues and never once complained. Is so powerful to me. And so when I've looked at that, and I've tried to look at it from a scientific view as well as from a human point of view, when I look at it from a science point of view, what I look at is the energy of that. So we have to give labels to things, and it kind of gives us false imagery because energy is energy. But when we look at different styles of energy, if you like, or different frequencies or different waves, we can say that there's a masculine energy and a feminine energy. It's not a gender conversation. It's just a way to label the energy. And so typically we would say that the male energy is linear and slow and step by step, like a clipboard mentality. Everything's in lines, but start a company, build a hierarchy type of thing, have a problem, call a meeting. And then the feminine energy is much tighter and spins really fast. And we can draw this, and we can do artist impressions of it, but it spins really fast, and it's a very nurturing energy. Once you're inside it, it really sort of nurtures and nests you. But if you're outside of it, it's very ruthless. It will leave you behind. And in anthropology, it's shown that at certain times of the planet's humans' time on the planet, one or other of those energies dominate. And when the feminine energy dominates, which was many hundreds of years ago, so it's now come back, right bang in it right now. So many hundreds of years ago, the leaders were female, the leaders of the tribe, leaders of the nations were female, and they were ruthless. They did not go back to pick up their wounded, and they did not take prisoners. And people are usually surprised by that. So I see this being played out now in the world. So I'm able to tap into the experiences I had with my mother, the experiences I had with my wife, to change the way that I behave now that this energy is starting to dominate again. So I've had to take my ego as an entrepreneur and put it aside. Supervisory management now has no place. I've had to rethink the way that I structure my companies away from hierarchy, down to flat hub model. Mm-hmm. And I've changed my management style from that supervisory style to peer-to-peer trust. Mm-hmm. I've taught myself how to trust my intuition more than I have done in the past. In business, I was always told I was very analytical, as if it was a prized asset. It doesn't help me anymore. I need to be more intuitive. And so I have tools and techniques in the transformation experience to help everybody tap in and trust their intuition again, because we don't have time to call a meeting anymore or to hire somebody to sort the problem. We have to do it ourselves, and we have to do it instantly. And those companies that aren't able to do it, you can see them all out there. They're boarded up. They've gone out of business. All the huge hierarchical companies don't exist anymore. And even some of those that were in the books, good to great and built to last, turned out not to be great or built to last. So I know it's a long-winded answer to what experiences have had the most impact on me, but it's been able to see what feminine energy is capable of, feminine power. And because we're all half male, half female, but we lean one way or the other, I've been able to, in the last couple of decades, I've been able to lean more into the feminine energy side of me and to understand that a bit better and use that in business better and to great effect. So, I'm now, these are serious businesses. So I'm now on business number 7. The total enterprise value is close to $1 billion. That doesn't happen by chance. That happens by being adaptable, by observing the world as a wizard would observe the world. You observe, you step back, you decide on a different reaction. So I've been doing that in business now for a while, and that's one of the things I try to teach.
So, you come across spiritual, but also very grounded towards business and money. So have you found it difficult to connect with people on both grounds when many people don't seem to understand that both can coexist and they don't need to be separate in nature? A lot of people feel that if you have a lot of money, somehow spirituality goes out the window. I don't know why. Usually people who don't have any money feel that way.
No, I feel the opposite. So, on trevorgblade.com, I think we have a tagline at the top where science and spirituality come together. And we also have where science, spirituality, and financial independence come together. I don't see them as separate silos. I never have. And I've never met someone who is quote unquote successful in life who hasn't also worked on transforming themselves personally. And that often means an inner journey, a spiritual journey. So, and the funny thing is, if I'm with a group of successful entrepreneurs and we sit down, we don't talk about business ever. We talk about the fun stuff. So we'll talk about energy transformation. We'll talk about philosophy. We'll talk about one suchness. We have those wonderful conversations where the time disappears completely, and we're 2 bottles of wine down before we know it. We don't have conversations about, what's the next company you're going to build or anything like that. So I've not found them to be mutually exclusive. I've found them to be supportive.
When you think of the craziness going on in the world today, what do you believe to be the greatest threat to human civilization?
Probably humans themselves. So I don't know what's going on in the world today because I deliberately avoid observing that.
Why is that? It's still reality, regardless that we like it or not. I mean,
so nothing's ever changed, right? So I'm grey-haired now, and in my stretch of time on this earth, when I'm grey-haired, nothing ever changes. I grew up with the world telling me that we were heading to an ice age, and by the year 1980, England will be like Siberia. Okay, and then there's a knock on the door, and there's a guy selling an oil heater. So it was all nonsense, just like it is today. Like people tell me now I'll be drowning in 20 years. Apparently, all the ice is going to melt and the ocean is going to rise. Even in my basic physics, I think, well, how can that happen? Because when the ice melts and it's glass, it doesn't overflow. The opposite happens; it goes down. So so the nonsense we get told, and it's hard to look out at the world and not allow that nonsense inside your mentality. And so from a young age, the world told me, like the chicken packing thing, this is your life. This is how it's going to turn out. These people are your enemy. These people we like. And at the same time, I'm getting bullied because I'm an English guy living in a place where the Welsh didn't want the English. Okay, so there's hatred coming my way, not the terrible hatred we can see in other places, but enough hatred to really make a 14-year-old boy go a bit crazy, I used to hide in the library. That's how I started reading biographies. And bullying actually saved my life, literally. So right now here in California, we've just had what Californians think is a rain season. Okay, I'm from England. It seems like nothing at all. It seems like a sunny day in England. If I observe the world, if I read the online news or I put the TV on, what I'm being told is I'm getting barraged, plowed, pummeled by a winter storm. But I look out my window and it's a little bit cloudy. So I find that if I try to observe what's going on in the world, that it gets inside my mentality and it has an effect on me and how I behave. For instance, I would not have invested in cryptocurrencies if I'd listened to what people were saying about cryptocurrencies 10 years ago. I would not have started my first business in 2008 when the world was saying that there's a credit crunch and a housing crisis come. This is the worst time to start a company. If I engaged the world, I would have changed my decision and said, maybe I'll do it later. Fortunately for me, I had read something different. So I'm very careful with what I put in my head. What I read was that half of the Fortune 500 companies started in a recession. It's the best time to start a company because supplies are available, people, material, it's all available and at a cheaper price. And I found that myself, when I was trying to raise money, when times are good, knocking on people's doors, they had no time for me. We're fine. We don't need your business. We got everything we need. Thank you. Go away, Sonny. And then when we're in a recession and I knock on the same doors, their attitude is completely different. They go, come on, Mr. Blake, come on in, have a cup of tea. We'd love to talk about your business idea. So I find if I do the opposite of what the world seems to be, I find a place of love. So I have a friend who watches the news constantly, who will talk for hours about what's going on in Yemen, or talk for hours about now what's going on in Ukraine. When that happens, I try to get him out of his house, away from his TV, and I'll take him to the lobby of a hotel. And we'll have a drink in the lobby of the hotel. And I ask him, I point around, I say, do you see anybody trying to kill each other? Do you see anybody arguing or anybody fighting? What you see is love. Everyone's happy. If you look for the love, you'll find it. If you look for the horror, you'll find it, because both exist simultaneously. That's the experience of being human to an extent.
But is the horror not often a threat to the love if you ignore it?
I'm not saying ignore it. I'm not saying ignore the horror. I'm saying don't.
But by not being aware of it, you're technically ignoring it, are you not?
I'm sensible enough. I hope I'm intelligent enough to know that right now in the world, there's 47 wars going on. I'm only going to hear about 2 of them because that's the authorities the ones the authorities are interested in. Okay. They're not going to tell me what's going on in the Sudan because they're not interested.
Right. There's no interest there for anyone to do anything. Correct. Yeah.
No, but I'm intelligent enough to be able to find my information about what's happening around the world without paying attention to the horror. It is so. My wife's family were German. My current wife Jess, her family's from Germany too. Their stories of horror are completely different to the ones I was told when I grew up, because my parents, obviously were in the Second World War. Everyone's view of the horror is very, very different, and I try to form my own opinion rather than allow the opinions out there to influence what I think about any of that. When I talk about this, sometimes it sounds like he's burying his head in the sand. And to an extent I am, but I'm doing it because I'm a really selfish guy. I want a good life. I don't care if I'm a hologram. I don't care if I'm a pawn in some god's chess game. I want to be a happy pawn, or I want to be a happy hologram. And I find that the more that I allow the horrors that go on in the world to penetrate my mentality, the less likelihood there is of me being able to express myself the way I want, which is to be a happy, success with balance is how I describe it. To be a successful guy, both in relationships and business and life, but also with a balanced life.
Do you believe happiness plays a role in purpose in life?
Great question. I don't know. It's just a personal thing. I like to be happy. I'm a happy guy, and I really enjoy that. And I don't want anything to spoil that. And that's pure selfishness on my part, but I'm really happy with it.
I mean, it's a choice of experience. I don't think it's selfishness. I'm just, if I had the choice between a happy experience or a shitty one, I don't think I'd be like, you know what, I'm going to go on the shitty experience of life. It sounds like the better journey I'd like to undertake,
I found the same thing. There's no glory in being poor. There's no glory in being ill. There's no glory in any of those things.
Like, why would you want that? Like if you had the choice between 2 ends. I mean, sometimes you're given cards you don't necessarily want that you just have to learn to deal with, but it's not always a want or anything else. But I appreciate the conversation. I think we discussed quite a bit of interesting topics, things we don't hear a lot in a lot of podcasts. So I appreciate you being on. And where can people find more information? You were talking earlier about techniques and things that people should kind of follow. Where can they go to learn something?
It's all in the same place. It's trevorgblake.com, spelt out my name. It's my name spelt out, trevorgblake.com. And there's a couple of freebies there. There's the practical magic of the 5-hour workday. I wrote it during COVID because so many people were coming from the corporate world into the working from home without any support, and you can burn out really quickly. So for people working from home, it's particularly useful. Practical magic of the 5-hour workday, which is about doing productive periods, but making sure you get away and do productive relaxation time too. But sort of schedule the day with discipline that way. So that's useful, and there's no catch to it. I have a course called the Transformation Experience, which takes 30 to 45 days to do the first time. All my proceeds go to my animal sanctuary up in Washington. And that's it. So trevorgblake.com.
All right. We'll definitely check it out and encourage people to obviously check it out with a link below. Thanks again for being on, Trevor. I appreciate your time.
Pleasure is mine. Thanks for the questions.